Okay, so Richard is getting his set up.
Waiting for YouTube to give us the okay.
Uh-huh. Okay.
We have the okay from YouTube. Now I'm going to see if we have the okay from Twitch.
Uh-huh. And we have the okay from Facebook already.
You do that last.
Oh, okay, good.
Okay.
Good,
We
I
have
like
the
that.
okay from Twitch. Now Facebook.
Okay.
And Facebook said they're ready when we're ready.
Okay, so are you all ready? Do you have something to drink if you need it? Okay, and I'm turning off my phone. And I go ahead and turn off your phone anyway, although remember to turn it back on. Anyway. Okay. Okay, so if everybody's ready, I think we're ready, right?
Are you okay, Vicki?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm good. No. Actually, I've not often had a laughing fit on the show, but it has happened once or twice. Yeah.
Okay, so step one is for you to throw the
Okay.
switch. Let's see. Light is on.
Yep.
Put the clapper in front of your face.
Okay.
When you hit the clapper, you're on the air.
Thanks. Welcome to Talking Peace with the Western New York Peace Center, being recorded here at Think Twice Radio in the home of the future, also the home of our friend and producer Richard Wicca. And we thank our friends at WBNY, Buffalo's original alternative radio station at 91.3 FM, coming out of Buff State. So we thank our friends at Buff State also. And when I think of thankfulness, I do think about our indigenous friends. I think about how, despite the fact that we are on stolen Haudenosaunee land here in Western New York, and each of our guests and some of our listeners may be on other lands that were stolen from other indigenous people. In spite of all the hardships, the violence, the extermination, and the land theft, they still are full of gratitude, and they start their days and their events off with Thanksgiving and with thinking of the people there who make it possible, thinking of Mother Earth and the living waters that make life possible, thinking of all of the plants, nutritional and medicinal, and the trees, and all of the creatures of all kinds, and the different elements, and the original instructions, and our Creator who gave us those original instructions that we should be abiding by so that life can continue in this creation. And then for the Haudenosaunee, then they say Nyahweh, so which is, sort of almost like Ashe, that let it be so. And then the people say Nyo, so Nyahweh. And you could say Nyo.
Nyo.
Thank you. Well, again, we're returning to a big and very important subject, and we'll be recognizing just how important it is and just how much we need to still do to change things. We have two very special guests who are very well informed about Afghanistan and now especially 1 year after the fall to the Taliban. So we'll talk about Afghanistan, also our Afghan friends, etc. So first I just want to introduce, and I'll go counterclockwise as our Haudenosaunee friends do. So first I'll introduce Sherri Maurin. Sherri has been so active and was a regular visitor to Afghanistan for so many years, also working on a live stream, a regular live stream that was a conversation, much like Talking Peace, really, only longer, and I will say even better, all kinds of wonderful things that you did with that. And it's still working very hard for our friends. So, Sherri Maurin, welcome.
Thank you. It's delightful to be here with you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for coming. And then we also have Basir Bita, who is a friend of the show, has been on a number of times before, and so busy from your perch in Canada. So we're very grateful to you for all the time that you take and for all the work that you did there when you were in Afghanistan, and now still doing now that you're over on this part of Turtle Island. So, or in that
Yeah,
part of Turtle Island.
Privileged and honored to be on your show.
Oh, we're so glad. We're so glad. So what we like to do is start off with values. And so when we think of Afghanistan and, the situation that they're in now, the history as well as the legacy, as well as where we are right now, and our parts in that, the parts to play. What values come to mind? What values do we want people to uphold in this issue or in this conversation? So we'll go around in that same way. So Sherri, what's a value or two that you think of in this respect?
Well, I want to start by acknowledging that I'm on the Ramaytush Ohlone lands.
Oh, thank you. Mm-hmm.
Some will call San Francisco, but these are the unceded lands of the Ramaytush Ohlone. And the values, the values that came to my mind when you asked that question were the ones that our friends were growing for more than a decade, and those were of food security, nonviolence, education for all, lifting up the rights of gender security, the rights of children, etc. So they still continue to hold those rights dear, and we still continue as a global community to uphold those values.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Yes, so important. And Basir, what do you think of?
Yeah, acknowledging where I am living now, the honor and privilege of, and so HGI, as they say in their own native language, Squamish, to thank someone, a real HGI to people of Squamish. I am speaking from Squamish territory, unceded Squamish territory, now called Vancouver. I'm thinking of, newcomer, refugee to Canada. I was thinking of what I can bring along with me to the citizens of Canada. I mean, what I can, from a so-called war-torn country, people traumatized, almost 5 decades of war, most of them initiated, ignited, continued, managed directly by the U.S. government. Support is love, word of peace, equality, diversity, education for all, human rights, and even some spiritual aspects of humanity to North America or Turtle Island.
Yes. Well, thank you. So also so many wonderful and important values. And, and they're all values that we've seen the Afghan people that we have mutually known have upheld all of those values to their own risk and well, I won't say detriment. I don't think it's been to their detriment, but was certainly to their danger, and it made it dangerous when the fall to the Taliban. But I think I want to uphold the one, my usual go-to values is so often is unarmed truth and unconditional love. As Dr. King said, that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. And the truth of what has happened to Afghanistan, the truth of what the U.S. role has been, and Canada to a much lesser extent, but the Canadians were also over there, I think, right? Yeah, but especially we were, what can I say? The greatest purveyor of violence in the world is my own government. Again, quoting Dr. King. So the truth of that and the truth of our responsibility in the way things went down and continue to go down. And then love, which makes me think of Cornel West. So often he says, you know, a baby in Afghanistan is the same as a baby in San Francisco, of the same value as a baby in, you know, in London or in anywhere you want to care to pick. You know, we're all one human family, and nobody has more value than anybody. And when we realize that one love, that's when we're going to start to behave the way we need to in that way. So remembering and thinking about what has gone on in the past year and then the so many years before it. I think, you know, that this is what we'd like to do in this program about Afghanistan 1 year later after the fall to the Taliban. And so maybe to start, if we start with, I know, Sherri, you know, we'll just, again, go around like that, you know, in that counterclockwise way. If I don't know, in your different areas, I know the Haudenosaunee do it counterclockwise. So then on the other side of the world in Nepal, I know that they go clockwise, not counterclockwise. So I find that very interesting. But so we'll go around. So Sherri, what would you say? What would you like to uphold to mention when we think about what has happened in the past year in Afghanistan?
Well, there's so much we could say.
Yes.
I think for my segment, I'll just focus on the women.
Mm-hmm.
We worked with a community that gave equality to men and women. They work side by side, often without the previously required chaperones of a brother or a father. And since the change or the fall of Afghanistan to the Taliban, in Doha, there was commitments to uphold women's rights in the negotiations between the Taliban and the United States. But all of those have been ignored completely. Women have lost their positions in the jobs, except in the sectors like education, somewhat, and in healthcare. If it's accessible, they're usually done or often being done by women. But more importantly or equally, it started off, I think, with the Taliban releasing many of the prisoners from jail who were in there for, and I'm thinking of this from a Amnesty International report that's just been published that I can put in the text, that the Taliban released prisoners who were in there for domestic violence, which immediately put their partners at a high level of insecurity. Women who've been living in shelters for domestic violence, those were closed or somehow taken over by the Taliban for their own purposes, and women were either forced to go onto the streets or were sent back to their homes where the domestic violators were now back to. Schools were closed. High schools, except for those that are private schools, have been closed or no longer available, and it's a continuous excuse. Sometimes related to uniforms and sometimes related to a lot of other things. But essentially, girls, unless they're in private schools, are no longer able to do. In university level, I'm not even sure. Well, Amnesty was saying that the girls who are able to go to university, they're so well restricted that some have dropped out just because it's too difficult to get a fair and equal education. I mentioned the jobs. Many of the women's jobs have been disallowed. There's a lot of girls being picked up and women for such violations as not wearing the right clothing or not being accompanied by one of the legitimate men. And Basir could tell us the name Maharam, the men that are legitimate to accompany.
Mahram,
which are usually a brother or an uncle or a father. And if they appear on the streets with other than that or somebody who's suspected not to be related, they can be jailed and severely violated for that illegal thing and could stay in prison a long time or even more severe consequences. So One more example is those that are allowed to leave Afghanistan for educational purposes. It's very difficult for visas to be allowed, and so there's a lot of different pathways that are being developed to get girls out of the country in order that they might be secure and potentially continue school elsewhere. So I'll stop there, and I know Basir has many, many more things to add to that.
Thank you, Sherri. So yes, Basir, what would you say strikes you as sort of some of the most significant things that you know about in the past year?
Well, there's been tons of ups and downs over last year. I can start by pointing out to economy. The economic situation is super unimaginably poor. People don't have access to healthy food, almost no access to potable water. There's extreme drought across the country, and it's been already warned that that Afghanistan and the whole people inside Afghanistan will face some natural catastrophe, including drought. As for the Taliban, I can say that the Taliban has been on power. They were not supposed to be, the government was easily handed over to Taliban. It was not a takeover, it was handed over. Unfortunately, they used the words in mainstream media, used the word takeover. They didn't take it over.
Right.
They were handed. They were handed over. So Sherri touched on the women and their situations. I mean, almost no women have access to education. The women who used to walk outside their homes and freely work and be, some support financially for their family and to practice and enjoy movement rights, they're all now back into their, they call it prison home.
Right.
The ethnic conflict is still going on. Street robbery can be seen everywhere. Prices for food and commodities skyrocketed twice, triples now. There's no money going in and out of the country. The entire banking system almost paralyzed. The prosecution of minority groups, specifically Hazaras, the ethnic groups that I come from, they're being extremely prosecuted all across the country. They just knock the doors, and if they suspect that there's a Hazara family living, they will definitely come after you and will search your house.
Searching for
also,
what?
Searching for weapon, searching for other stuff.
Things to take.
Yeah, things to take. Even during the first period of Taliban as being on power, 1996, 2001, you belong to Hazara, being a member of Hazara ethnic groups, that was enough to be executed or to be shot or to be wiped out. So still Hazaras are struggling with the Taliban. A couple of days ago, there was a big blast. They claim the Taliban and even the previous corrupt governments used to put the responsibility to ISIS or Daesh, but there is no ISIS in Afghanistan. No one claims that, hey, I am the head of ISIS.
Right.
$10 billion still frozen by the U.S. government, and I hope that the U.S. government is not going to, as claimed, is not going to distributed to survivors of 9/11. But there are so many ways that the U.S. governments can pull the money into Afghanistan and make them disposable only to the people of Afghanistan without restricting Taliban's access to that money. Political upheaval is still going on. People from outside those so-called warlords or ethnic leaders are trying to get back to country, supporting some, people rising. There are also two main figures of the Taliban were recently targeted down, and the U.S. government claims that we killed them, like they caught Saddam Hussein in Iraq. They killed Osama bin Laden. They arrested so many people, put them in the prison without being charged. But they killed two main figures of the Taliban, but there is no change in the situations of public in Afghanistan. And unfortunately, refugees, particularly those who want to cross the borders, and more particularly Hazaras or ethnic groups, minority ethnic groups, their access to safe passage to cross borders to a safer country like Iran and Pakistan is super restricted. Right. And even they are being beaten by the Taliban. I'll stop here.
So I feel like one of the things that we were just saying at the very beginning of the top of the show before we started, that people sort of think, well, it's the Taliban, it's their fault, all these things that are happening. And there are many things that they're doing that are just so damaging, so wrong, so violent and unjust. But there are also the parts that the U.S. are doing, and the fact that the freezing of that money supply, so it's their entire money supply was actually in the United States, so that the United States was able to hold and freeze that money supply, so there is no money supply. So that some of the things are, that they're doing, it's because they don't want women to have rights, or they don't want this, or they don't want that. But they also, how do they pay, people for doing a job when there is no money supply? So, that's the U.S. at work. And as you say, there are other ways that they could stream that money into the country for the use of the people, because it is the people's money. It's not the Taliban's money. They are, just, so there's other ways to let that money in and to give aid to the people, so that people, the idea that, is it, when we say relative to the situation of course, Afghanistan has had so many years of war. There was all the years of the Russia in there, and actually the birth of Al Qaeda as the U.S. arming people to fight against the Russians in Afghanistan, right? So there was that. So there's been, is it 40 years of war? Is it more?
Almost 50 years.
Almost 50 years. Almost, that's what I thought. So almost 50 years of wartime, but yet, is it worse than ever now? It seems that it might be worse than ever now in some respects. And I just want to ask, maybe if you, do you have a thought you want to share, Sherri, and then especially Basir, your response to that? You're on mute, I think.
I know.
Oh,
yes, just very briefly, as far as complicity by the U.S., one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is the burn pits.
Right.
Our Congress has just allocated significant dollars towards the healing or health care of vets that were over in Afghanistan just for 1, 2, or 3 years, had been working in the burn pits where they burn not only the trash, etc., but part of the Democracy Now! Report indicated that it was within the contracts for acquisition of equipment, they had to, it was easier to buy new equipment than to get parts for used. So they burned tanks that had a problem.
Oh my
They
God.
burned guns. They burned weaponry of all kinds. All that has been ingested not only by the soldiers and caused long-term healthcare issues, but I'm mindful of all the Afghans
Right.
who are not included in the reparations for that and have lived and continue to live by those same burn pits, as well as in Iraq, but significantly in Afghanistan. So U.S. has a huge complicity and need for reparations in that area.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So true. And Basir, what do you think?
Well, maybe I can point out two things. One is about the U.S. and its involvement dating back almost 50 years ago, when there was a Cold War and the U.S. started supporting some insurgent groups or terrorists around the country. You know, it's not only Pakistan supporting these terrorist groups, but also recently, right after 9/11,
Right.
the Afghanistan invasion, Iran, Tajikistan, Russia, and even China, and even India, they started supporting terrorist groups behind the scene. But mainly and primarily led by the U.S. governments, the birth of Al-Qaeda, Taliban's, and most of his globally known insurgent groups, they were funded, they were given birth by the U.S. governments, funded, they were grown, and now they are the enemies of the U.S. citizens and everywhere. That's one side of the story. The other side is about, you know, the mindsets, mentality, the values that people of Afghanistan share nowadays after 2 decades of the U.S. presence, U.S. government's presence in Afghanistan. It's totally changed from the Afghans before the U.S. invasion. People are more educated. People have access to internet. They have so many resources. They have more knowledge and awareness, even to some extent, even higher than so many people in Europe and in Turtle Island. People are thirsty for education, particularly women. There were thousands of people and projects implemented in Afghanistan to promote equality and diversity in the country. And so many people still in hiding, they support this idea. They promote these ideas. They go knock the doors and they open the conversations to remind the peoples that who we are, where we come from, what common values we used to share before the U.S. invasion, things like that.
Well, it's good to hear you say that some of the things that that we hope to see, that, you know, make a life, you know, a peaceful life and a good life for the common good. One of the things that we know is that it has been shown that women being supported doesn't mean you can't wear a hijab or something like that, but women being educated and supported and having, you know, human rights, as, you know, that they're not a lesser being, you know, that is the primary indicator of how well a country will be doing and the quality of life. All the other indicators is, you know, women's rights is so key, because so many women, because of the roles that women take in society and in the family. And so I'm glad to hear you saying that, you know, that some more than we think, more than I sometimes think, over the 20-year period that the U.S. was over there in control, there was so much of drones and violence and home invasions and everything like that. So it's good to hear. Now, we know that the people we knew, what they were working on, you being one of them, right? An advisor to a youth group that was working on nonviolence, having these international conversations about how to have the common good, how to look after everybody's needs and the planet, people and the planet. So I'm glad to hear that some of that is going on. And certainly some of those friends of ours, thanks to, to you both, to Kathy Kelly, and to lots of other people, Starhawk, or other, people, our friends in Portugal. There have been some successes for getting some people out and about into other countries where they can be safe and they can make and are making wonderful contributions. So I'd like to shift gears into that a little bit and sort of go around for each of you to talk about some of the projects that you've been working on, that we've been working on, and some of those successes. So, Sherri?
Yeah, thank you, Vicki. I'll just summarize where some of our friends have gone, because the story is very good in some cases and a work in progress in others, and sometimes discouraging. Mm-hmm. The successes include 8 of our friends going to Portugal, to a permaculture area in southern Portugal, where they are not only being receiving expanded training on permaculture, but able to work as a group on a significant project down there, restoring the land of an area that was pretty decimated. So that's a really exciting win.
Yes.
3 of them have gone to Germany, and they're challenged in that they were some of our most significant organizers on permaculture and tree planting and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I've talked to one of them who is going into food distribution for the poor, and serving meals at a local center, etc. But
is that
they're
a female?
No,
it's
one
of the. Just wondering. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just a. Yeah. Okay.
Well, maybe his wife is working with him, but.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't mention that.
Great. No, we're not mentioning names, so I just asking the question. Yes. Go ahead.
But we currently have 26 in Pakistan, some of whom actually have places to go. One of those has a full scholarship to California and has just been turned down for the second time on a visa. 5 of them are all staged, and we have all the applications, etc. But the challenge for all of them, unless they have a specific sponsoring group in Canada or in the United States, is they need a UNHCR identification as a refugee. Right. And Pakistan as a country has said, we don't have the capacity to do that. So they're issuing recognition that they're in the country, but nothing that will help them get the refugee status. So there's a lot of work going on by our group and others to see if they can get around that. There's some that have gone to Kazakhstan. There's 24 still left in Afghanistan in different stages. Some are in Iran, and they're queued
Only
up to go
24? Still in Afghanistan?
24 that we're tracking.
That were, out of the original list.
Yeah, the original list. Right. There's a lot of others, but those are the ones we're following up on.
Right. No,
there's
I'm surprised that it's that few. So that's good.
Well, some have not applied or decided to stay with their families, or have, families might have healthcare reasons, or they don't have documents. So we're able to track those who actually have documents, and those documents are very hard to get. Some are in Iran, which is another problem because we can't, because of the U.S. situation and the sanctions on Iran, we can't help those directly. 5 of those are staged to go to Brazil. And we already have several in Brazil already. So it's many and varied. It's a privilege a privilege to work on these teams because I've never worked with such a creative group before. Who are finding solutions under rocks that I never thought would exist. So my shout out and gratitude, tashakurs, to all those working in this very difficult area.
Well, you've done a tremendous amount also yourself. And Basir, what would you add to that?
What I would like, thank you, Sherri. What I would like to add is that I hope those who watches and listens today's show would show some interest to support some of these families who are still in Pakistan or Afghanistan. There are ways that maybe Sherri can describe if they are interested. And the situations for those who even left the country, Afghanistan, and living in neighboring countries is severe. People who ended up in Brazil, they not only struggle with language and culture, but they also, there's a lack of, Afghan community in Brazil. And people are already homesick, lack of support from Brazilian government, and lots of other relevant, imaginable or unimaginable, difficulties, including mental health challenges they face, because they're all deeply, deeply traumatized for and it's not, and some of them, like Hazaras, we are historically speaking, we are traumatized. We have gone through too much trauma, and we experienced deep historical traumas.
So I want to say, of course, that is very clear and very true. We've seen it in many different populations. I'm going to say Jewish people who had, centuries of pogroms. My dad was a German Jew, so that's some of how I became a social worker. That intergenerational trauma, we know, that the effects of trauma are intergenerational, and actually they're mental and physical. So those, because we are body-mind complex and body-mind-spirit complex, some of us would say, so of course that would be true. And of course, when people have, especially, there's just the historic trauma, but then there's the actual recent traumas and the extreme trauma that there has been, both even when the U.S. was still there, and then especially during the fall and all of the increase in violence because of the desperation. So we know poverty is a big violence generator because people need to eat. So what will you do to eat? That, and what will you do for your family to eat? It's just so very, very distressing. And so, yes, for some of these families or individuals, when they've gone, there's always, if they're in a safe and secure environment, that can help. If they're with people who they have a good support system around them, that can help. But it doesn't change the fact that the worry for family and friends who are still left behind, the trauma that they still have, and the survivor guilt, which is huge. I got out, my friend did not. Why me? Why did I get out and he did not get out? So that is painful for people. Very, very real and very dramatic trauma for people. So one of the things that we're doing is looking for more buddies for people to buddy up with some of the people, whether they're in Afghanistan, Pakistan, other places, or even, in the other countries, in Brazil, etc., which makes me think of some calls that I should make. But anyway, So, I think about that. I'm wondering also. Now, we also have. We're talking about. We always like to talk, and we always bring it up at least at the end, but always throughout. Really, ways that people can help. That's one of the ways, and people could get in touch with me or through the Western New York Peace Center to get plugged into this group that Sherri's talking about, or groups, because there's little subgroups on some of the different parts of the project or something, but to buddy up with somebody. And of course, sometimes there's some language. There might be some language difficulties, but even then, Google and all of that makes it easier. So if you're writing, you can get your translation, even though it might be a botch translation at times. We won't volunteer you for everything, Basir. but I wanted Sherri to talk about the project in Canada. I don't know how much you want to say about that. Whether, at what stage or whether there's anything more to mention about that. And then also Starhawk and the help that she is offering. And on some places, the link will be there, but you can also tell people, so people listening on the radio know where to go to find out where they could offer some money to help with some of these efforts to get, what I didn't say is this group that was, a group of young people and associated, sometimes older people, associated with them or parts of their families, etc., who were working who were connected with us, that we knew in Afghanistan and visited, that were working on programs of social uplift all through those years, from at least, in 2009-10, that we started working with them, and Global Days, the different global efforts to connect and pursue, the common good is something that these young people were doing. So they're really exemplary people. So, Sherri, if you would talk a little bit about some of these friends and that effort.
I want to start, Vicki, by lifting up a project that Basir is initiating on with the trauma we mentioned.
Yes.
There is a lot of work being done about trauma recovery through writing. And so I want to lift up the work Basir is doing in doing writing workshops in Canada for Afghan immigrants there to help resolve conflict. And we're doing that on a minor level, not to the workshop level, but beginning to have our friends who are in other countries do writing, and essentially to focus on a question like, your life as a woman, your life as a, what was life like, or what is your current life like, or what are family relationships? That for us, that is molded into weekly conversations that our sponsors are having with our friends. And we've started a project of storytelling. And there, as you can imagine, when people are waiting a long time to move, there's definitely a level of sorrow and frustration that might creep in. So one of the ways of addressing that is to just have people tell their stories, a good part of their lives, their hopes, their dreams. And they're alternating with the sponsor groups. So it's a way of each learning more about each other. So when they arrive, we're already a community. We're already a close group. Our process has been difficult, but probably not any more difficult than other countries as well. So you mentioned Starhawk, and I'm very grateful for that. Each one of the candidates who comes, no matter what country they're going to, that is a very prohibitively expensive process for all the expenses of setup, etc. In Canada, they require that we have the first year of expenses all paid, including apartments and food, etc., on deposit. So Starhawk and the Earth Activist trainers, who are permaculture teachers, and have set up a program that I sent Vicki the link for all of you who want to help our friends get to Canada. And we have to put those up before all the applications can be finished and that the money has to already be in an account. So if people are interested in, I've given Vicki the link.
So can you also state the link so that people who are listening to the radio can also go?
Yeah.
How would they find it? What would they Google or DuckDuckGo or whatever? I use DuckDuckGo, but
Yeah,
how
it's
would
a
they
Go
find it?
Lively. Thank you. It's a Go Lively account, and under the Earth Activist Trainers for emergency Afghan relief. And I can while Basir is talking, I can get the link and put it in the chat as well.
Well, it won't help in the chat. That's why I'm saying. If
Oh,
you can-
okay.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
people are listening too.
Okay.
So,
True.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So that would be how that would be. So they would go to Go Lively.
Well, it's Earth Activist Training,
Okay, so they could just Google Earth Activist Training,
comma, Afghan emergency relief.
Afghan Emergency Relief. Sure. Great. Thanks.
In addition, FOR, Fellowship Reconciliation,
Right.
has an account where if people want to assist the greater effort as well, including food for migrants that are in other countries, I can send that to you, Vicki. So when you post this to Facebook, it'll include the link for that as well.
But so for if they want to find it, is there a way that they could find it if they went to FOR?
No, it's under Kathy Kelly has it, and it's a private account, and the money is then sent through FOR. So I don't have that in front of me,
Okay.
but
Well,
just
that
to
would be
let people
something-
know.
If people sent it to the Western New York Peace Center and they
Yes,
flagged
perfect.
Afghan refugees or Afghan relief, then it would go.
Yeah.
We could send it.
Yeah, if they use the Starhawks link, there will be a tax receipt distributed at the end of the year for anyone who's that's of interest too, and it's good for either Canadian or U.S. dollars.
Sure. Good. So now, Basir, what were you? What about some of the people? Now, are there other people coming to Canada that you know of? I know here in Buffalo we have a lot. We have a lot of people from Afghanistan that came because they've worked either in the government or for the U.S. military, and that's mostly who got out and who is here. So I know we've been working on these other people who are not on those lists. Do you know of more people who are coming to Canada in that way?
Even the evacuation process is objectable. The way that the people were selected and how selective, particularly the U.S. government was with regards to, ethnic groups. The Bonn conference in 2001 and the way that the U.S. governments decided to structure Afghan government and new government. Sure. And it was structured based on the ethnic groups and then some estimate of, 20% the X, 35% Y. But unfortunately, the U.S. government did not stick to that kind of, things to bring over people from all different backgrounds into the U.S. territories. But I have some friends who recently arrived in Canada, a close friend of mine by the Canadian special immigration measure. But they are still friends of mine from the youth groups that you mentioned. I hope that we get to the point that we raise enough funds and all the descriptions that Sherri mentioned, and to bring them over to Canada, which will be through private sponsorship programs, not through the government's refugee programs. And I hope that more people who are at real risk, including women's rights activists, LGBTQ rights activists, people who did lots of good things, peace activists, nonviolence proponents, they get a way to get out of the country and find a safe haven outside the country.
So it sounds like one of the things that's holding people up is the money, too. So there's not just the red tape, but there's also, for some of these people, it's the money. It's that having the amount that you were talking about, Sherri, this own deposit for this and that, and the actual monies that need to be available to reassure the Canadian government. The U.S. government is a whole nother story. I almost think that it's hardly worth talking about the U.S. government because they make it so hard to get people in. When you talk about, this young lady who could get into a program and yet she couldn't, twice she got refused.
Yeah, it's the U.S. has similar kind of requirements in some cases, and I just looked up the actual account.
Oh, okay.
It's called Earth Activist Emergency Fund or Afghan Relief.
Earth
Activist Emergency Fund for Afghan Relief. And if they get to the place, they'll have the joy of seeing the permaculture plot that was given to our friends at Kabul University. So there's some figures that I put into that photo that are, one of them is actual, the other one was put on there, but it's the actual permaculture plot where they took land that was completely gray and dead and converted it to a lush food forest. I bring that up because many of the people that were able to get secure places, like in Portugal and hopefully in Canada, are permaculturalists.
Right.
So they're value added. They're not, quote, dependent. So we're very thrilled about that and honored to be working with them.
Absolutely. Well, I remember their garden in the compound of their place. How beautiful, with their little rabbit and all their food growing and some flowers too, and the rain barrel on the roof, all of that. And planting trees. They were very big on planting trees. It's so important everywhere. And such a renewal. That's when we were talking the Gnonio, the trees, the spirits of the trees, but also just the oxygen from the trees, everything about trees, the holding the Mother Earth together there, keeping the water there, So they have this very permaculture was so big in what they were learning and spreading because it was people on the planet. So, yeah, it's wonderful. So we are getting towards the end of the show. So we really just have time for just some final thoughts and maybe sort of what do you want people to remember and what are your hopes for the future, I would just say, for Afghanistan and for our Afghan friends. So, Sherri, then Basir.
I have deep sorrow about what's happened and to the dissolution, but my hope lies in that there was a nonviolence institute that was being created and being built, and in the final stages that has not been completed because of what's happened. And my hope is that one day we'll all return and be able to recreate that and expand it to be even more inclusive of ideas and like that. And one of the joys that we've had recently is one of our friends just made it to the United States to begin PhD work, on a full scholarship. And our hope is that he'll be part of restructuring that from a engineer. So a lot of them are getting the skill sets that will make the Nonviolence Center even more solid and impermeable in the future.
That would be wonderful. From your lips to God's ears. Yes. And Basir?
Well, I just want to emphasize on the fact that we all, as members of human family, our lives and our future matter equally. The life, the future, and the situations of Afghans matter equally, as equal as the lives and the future of people of Ukraine. And I hope that the government and media outlets in particular would not forget Afghanistan. And my hope is that this money frozen by the US government, I would say not frozen, hostage by the US government, would be released soon and streamed to Afghanistan, so that some pressure and some difficulties would be lifted up as a result of streaming the money back to Afghanistan. The other hope is that we all, as members of human family, come to the point and recognize that we are, despite all diversity and despite all corruptions that we all went through, we come to a point that we consider that we are all equal, we're all our brothers and sisters, and love, unconditional love, would be the only value, or the core value that we would follow, so that the human beings would come back and get together again.
Again. Inshallah. Inshallah. That is what we hope and pray. So I would just say Nyahweh. You could say Nyo. Thank you. Yes, exactly like that. So I want to say I couldn't be more grateful for you all, for both of you, for your time, for all the work that you're doing, for coming on the show, but all the work that you're doing for our friends and for other people, for Afghans as well as for the communities that you're in, and for our friends, our Afghan friends outside the country, and our Afghan friends still inside the country, all of which need so much help and support from all of us. And I know you two have done so very much for that. So I couldn't be more grateful. I would just say Tashakur, Sol, Mahabat, and we just so grateful for both of you, for all of the work. Yeah, for all of the things. And so I can just say that this is Talking Peace, and together we have been talking peace in truth and love.